Okay, we're getting settled in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Be Open Forum, which is in partnership with Design Miami. And we're launching today a series of profile talks to act as a flashpoint and a gateway to the future of design, and specifically intuitive and sensory design, and also to reveal the intellectual curiosity and the creative vision of an exciting group of today's most innovative design minds. We have some of them here with us today. And first, a word about Be Open, the creative think tank whose mission is, quite simply, to promote the select people and ideas of today that will build us the solutions for tomorrow. And Be Open is identified as a global movement aimed at fostering innovation, creativity, as well as providing an international platform for research with the goal of creating innovative applications in the design field. This cultural, social, and practical initiative is supported by the Russian entrepreneur and philanthropist Elena Baturina and her multinational team charged with identifying and supporting young talents and helping evolve their visionary ideas. The focus of Be Open events in 2012 and 2013 relate to the emerging field of sensory design and to the further development of this concept. Combining human perception with the infinite possibilities of today's technology can remap design boundaries and create an unlimited variety of sensations. Eleanor Baturina herself has remarked, Be Open's year-long program focused on designing for the five senses is about leading us closer to that mysterious sixth sense, intuition. It's a journey into intuitive design through a synthesis of the sensory and technology, a fusion that could produce an enticingly infinite variety of results. So today, we present a very special group of diverse, sensory-led designers who indeed have been working to expand the limits, to evolve the practice, and some would say to pirouette on the edge of design, as we know it, as we have traditionally viewed it, judged it, or coveted it in public and private space, and as we have responded to it consciously and unconsciously in our daily encounters. Now, here today, surrounded by somewhat more traditional design forms, we will be discussing with them such things as olfactive design and haptic technologies, synesthesia and biochemical design, eating, touching, and feeling design, all of which stretch the boundaries, the experience, and the possibilities of design through a more sensory exploration. And what better moment than this moment, 2012, which is, as the Mayans have revealed through their designs, demarcates the shift to an evolved consciousness, to the end of time as we know it, or perhaps another way of looking at it, as the upending of anything that is understood or expected. For those who consider such things, as most creative minds cannot help but to do, please listen up. Somewhere there is a clock, which is also not a clock, ticking, and some intuitives believe we have less than 2 weeks left to grasp some of the very ideas that this group is here to discuss. And thank you to them for being here with us at Design Miami, and to the Be Open Creative Think Tank, which, as we mentioned, will sponsor additional events in 2013 focusing on design's multi-sensory outer edge and on the innovative techniques of the creators who are designing our future. And more about that at the end of the program. Now let's hear from today's guests. First, we have designer Dawn Goldworm, who, with her twin sister, I don't know if you've noticed them around here, but they're quite matching and quite beautiful. They run 1229, an olfactive branding agency based in Paris and New York. Dawn is here to tell us how she designs sensorial and emotional experience through scent, not just within perfume bottles, but within retail and art spaces, hotels, restaurants, for runway collections, for luxury products. As a matter of fact, she designed the filament of fragrance in the very air you are breathing right now, here in the tent. After 10 years working within what she calls the straight beauty industry, creating fragrances for Lady Gaga, Victoria Beckham, and Heidi Klum, among others, Dawn designed her own NYU graduate degree in olfactive branding, and since then she has pushed the edges of olfactive design to include original smell for paper and silk, and even for an art installation of carnivorous plants. Dawn, we are hoping you will talk about some of these and other recent projects, how you approach your goal of identifying and delivering a unique fragrential response for brands, for events, and for carnivorous plants. Thank you. Come on up, Don. Let's start with the design of your graduate degree at NYU. I'm very interested. How was that possible, and how did you present it to your teachers there?
The idea of olfactive branding is that you can look beyond the traditional or conventional ideas and touch points of how to talk to a brand or a product and create a more engaging and possibly more emotional and remembrance with the brand or the product. The way that works is that when you smell something, the olfactive nerve stimulates the emotional cortex of your brain. And it creates what I like to call these little scent emoticons. So you have scent and emotion linked together in your olfactive memory. And in your olfactive memory, these kind of little scent memories just kind of float around. And they're intimately linked together between scent and emotion. And so the next time you engage with the brand or the product, you automatically and instinctively have the same emotion that you did the first time you smelled the brand or the product. And so the basis of this thesis is pretty much this. And then we realized in researching this more and more that you could take it kind of beyond the traditional bottle, as you say, or products for skin application, and you could use it in things like design fairs, you could use it at fashion shows, you could use it in hotels and restaurants and subway stations, and really any part of your life where you can engage in an environment on an emotional level, which is pretty much everywhere.
Well, subway station sounds interesting. Please let me know which station you're doing next. I want to be there. Could you tell us a little bit about how you arrive at a sense that will clearly need to bring someone, all these different people, to the same kind of positive response? Because if you're branding for someone, you want it to be positive as well as memorable. So about that process a little bit, please.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we only create obviously part of the emotional experience. The other part of the emotional experience, depending on if you're in a branded environment or actually touching a branded product, you still have all the other sensory cues in place. But from a simple olfactive branding perspective, you very much have to research the market to understand how the consumer or the participant or the viewer is not going to reject the scent. Actually, the way that it's constructed is that you have to understand, based on consumer products, food, baby products, sun products, anything within that market that creates a comfort level, so you can take all of those comfortable kind of nuzzling, enveloping touch points, put them in the scent, and then add something signature. And so when they enter into the scent through these comfortable touch points, they're able to comfortably explore the signature that they don't understand. Because the way olfaction works is if I gave you something that you've never smelt before, you would automatically reject it. You would automatically not like it, and it's because you don't have an emotional memory of it. And so you get scared and you would say no and push it away. And so the way that you create this scent is there has to be a very comfortable, engaging part so that they can kind of go through and understand the signature. And it's that signature that creates the memory, so that every time they smell it again and again, they have the exact same emotion.
Well, how do you divine to figure out that entry point where instead of them being scared, they're invited into this experience? Where do you go for that?
I have to smell a lot. I pretty much have to smell all important consumer products in a marketplace. So like I said, all of the food items, all of the consumer products, baby products are terribly important per region, sun care products, anything that engages you from before you're born to when you're 10 years old, because that's when your olfaction is the strongest. Your sense of smell is fully developed in your mother at 13 weeks. So when you're born, the only thing you're born with is smell and emotion. And that's really how you translate every experience you have until slowly your other senses catch up. And then when your other senses are catching up, you also formulate a vocabulary in order to speak about them, which is something you never do with your sense of smell or your emotion, which is why it's so difficult to talk about when you fall in love with someone, or so difficult to talk about why you like a certain perfume or smell.
But that's so interesting that you bring up love. As, in terms of this idea of Be Opens to explore sensory design, you might eventually get into that area, I would imagine. I mean, you already are if you're giving people positive experiences around brands. But is it a flower field? Is it baking bread? Could you give us a little idea of where you go looking? You say you smell a lot. Please get more specific.
Okay, so I had the amazing experience to go to the Poltrona Frau factory this summer in Tolentino. They engaged 1229 to create a custom scent for their brand. And when I went into the factory, the purpose of me being there was to smell all of the materials that they use to make their furniture. And so walking in, initially I smelled the different dyes, the different colors, because every color, different dye had a different smell, the different leathers, the different textures of the leathers, which again, like changes the smell of the leather, the different fillings, which you can see here, so the twine, the rubber, the beechwood, there's like a coconut leaf that they use to stuff some of the chairs. I mean, amazing smells. And what you don't realize when you buy a Poltrona Frau chair or a sofa, or when you sit in it, is you're encompassed by all of these really wonderful and really kind of engaging smells that are very comfortable, naturally comfortable with the smell of the leather. And so we took this kind of experience, not only of being in the factory, but sitting in one of the chairs to recreate a brand scent that has that level of comfort, because you understand all of those pieces, the beechwood, the twine, even the plastic, the leather, and then we added that signature that I was talking about to make it slightly different, so that when you smell it again, you know it's Poltrona Frau and not another leather chair.
And that's top secret, of course.
That's top secret.
And how about flowers and plants and air and all the natural ingredients? Are they always blended into your experiential scent creation?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it depends. Every scent that we do is different. For instance, for Design Miami, which we created, I guess, 4 years ago now, the brief, per se, was to take the electricity or the dynamicism of Miami with the strangeness of the art world, or the strangeness, the weirdness, the texture, the interest of the art world. And so to get this electric feeling of Miami, which is very kind of fresh, open, vast, salty, very bright feeling of Miami, we used the lily notes. And it's a salicylate lily, so it's kind of a salty floral feeling that's very wet, very petally, very open. And we paired it with an anisec note, which kind of smells like black licorice, which is a little bit weird and dark, and it doesn't fit at all, but together they make this very signature smell that you smell in the tent.
So anise and a lily is really the basis of everything, with a bit of salt.
Well, it's the basis of Design Miami.
That's what I mean. And do you have a favorite place that you go to start as an artist and as a designer? What is your starting point?
Well, the interesting thing about being a fragrance designer or a nose or whatever you want to call it is that we don't necessarily have a stronger sense of smell than anyone else. What we have is a very vast and cataloged olfactive memory. And so it's like going to an old school library and picking little, reference book cards. And so every time I meet a brand and I engage with them and I take them through my creative process, I'm kind of pulling out these little references from my past to understand how I can put them together to create a new smell for the brand or the project.
But this is so interesting because as a creative person, you've probably explored various of your senses to arrive at a project or a career. The nose, how did you lead with your nose? Was it from childhood?
No, I would love to say that it was, that I had like this long love affair with perfumery and then I just ended up here. But actually, not at all. I interned at Avon when I was at NYU, but this was during my undergraduate years. And then I actually left to go to Sotheby's to get a degree in art business. I was really intrigued by this world and thought I would kind of parlay myself into it. But in ending my year in London, the fragrance director of Avon called me back, and she sent me to a perfumery school to have my nose tested. And I was very nervous because what does it mean to have your nose tested? And in fact, he wasn't testing my sense of smell, like I said, he was testing my olfactive memory to see what I could remember, take apart, and put back together to build fragrances, or now build scents. And he said to me, you should stay in perfumery. You'd be very good at it. And I said, I'm not quite sure. I don't know, this seems a little bit weird to have my entire life based on my nose. But I started training in the perfumery school, and I fell in love with it.
And if it wasn't really in your childhood that you understood anything about your future, now looking back at your childhood, is there any influence, or is there any moment, or is there any fragrance from then that keeps coming up again and again?
What's interesting is that I have a very bad memory for everything else but smell. And so when I started to train my nose, I started to remember all of these experiences I had in childhood that I hadn't remembered. And I did a study recently with people born before 1940. The smells from their childhood are dirt and grass, very natural smells. But after 1940, the smells of our childhood are crayons, Play-Doh, Crayola. They're all manufactured smells. And how amazing is that? Because it's exactly what we're doing. We're manufacturing memories based on olfaction. And so I started to remember all of these experiences I had as a child, and they've profoundly changed the way I look at designing scents for brands that are starting now, and how children or people tomorrow are going to remember these brands based on the way that they smell, almost more than anything else, because of the way the olfactive memory works, it being the largest and most powerful, acute kind of way into your memory and your emotion.
And since those days of crayons and Play-Doh, is there another generation of smells that you're aware of and that you draw upon?
Well, after the crayons and the Play-Doh and the fun part of life, you start to experience your sexuality and your sensuality. It's partly based on yourself and your hygiene, and scent becomes a very functional part of your life, and that changes the consumer products that you use and the foods that you eat, actually. And then, of course, you start to have lovers, and love affairs based on place, actually, is very interesting when you start to develop scents.
You just mentioned taste and smell coming together. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Right, so 85% of what you put in your mouth, you're actually smelling, you're not tasting. Your tongue is responsible for the 5 senses, maybe 6 now, they might have discovered another one.
Intuition.
But it's really smell that helps you interpret food. And so the food that we eat is very, very strongly linked to the smells that we like. But the interesting thing is the way that your saliva works, you can't actually smell a lot of the food you're eating until you taste it. So they're very strongly linked. They're sister relationships, which is why working with food architects, I recently did an installation with Bompas and Par in London, and they're amazing, amazing guys. And we did an installation that was recreating the idea of eating in your car, to take it from a very kind of basic fast food, almost junk eating when you go through a drive-thru, to a very kind of luxury, interesting experience. And so the scent we created was partly based on food, partly based on memory. It was a smoky meat note with red wine tannins, a cherry bubblegum, and a rose absolutes. It was super bizarre.
Delicious and luxurious. I want to talk about some of your projects because I'm sure everyone's interested. For a Lady Gaga scent, for instance, are we talking dirt? Are we talking Play-Doh? How much does she come into it with her sensorial memories?
What's interesting about working with a person that's not necessarily in the design world, which kind of has a similar language to perfumery, working with someone that's a musician, they have a very different language through sound than I have through smell, because your vocabulary that you use to smell is a borrowed vocabulary, in fact, because like I was saying, as your other senses develop, you learn how to talk about them, but because your sense of smell is already fully developed, you never learn how to talk about it. Actually, the part of your brain that smells and feels is not connected to the part of your brain that processes language. And so with Lady Gaga walking in, she would kind of speak through music, and I would have to translate that into kind of a perfumery vision. And that's how we spoke to each other, which was really interesting. And she wanted some very subversive ingredients, which I kind of talked her out of, I think. But we did do something that was very interesting and that fit a global marketplace, which when you speak about how to understand how to create that comfort piece, when you're doing a fragrance that hits every market in the world, you have to know what every 16-year-old finds comfortable or every 25-year-old feels comfortable. And because fine fragrance can be very faceted, you can kind of put all of these little pieces in and hopefully be successful.
Dawn, this picture behind us is so beautiful because it goes with your outfit and everything else. Do you have anything else you want to show us?
Sure, I could show you. Let's see. So this is just, as everyone is very well aware, being here, Poltrona Frau. And the scent, like I said, was based on all the ingredients that's actually in that couch with the leather. And then we added an eau de cologne piece because it's a very Italian brand. And they needed that piece to represent Italy. So this is interesting. We're designing a scent for a hotel now called the Thompson Hotel Group. They have many locations around the United States. And when I go through the creative process with a brand, I start with the color and texture of the brand. It's very important in designing a scent. And for their texture, they said they wanted leather, like almost oiled, worn-in leather, plush velvet, and mirrored surfaces. And then the colors were black and aubergine. And so what I do is I take these kind of textures and colors and I go into my olfactive memory. And I guess what I didn't mention is that I'm a synesthete. So when I smell, I automatically see color and texture. It's something that involuntarily happens. And so I kind of go backwards through these colors and textures. I look into my little olfactive library and I pull out smells that smell initially for me like velvet, leather, black, aubergine, and mirrored surfaces. But because we don't have the vocabulary to talk about smell, actually everyone translates smell through color in their mind. And so once I create this, if I gave you the smell, you would also say it smells like leather, velvet, mirrored surfaces, aubergine, and black. It's very interesting.
Mirrored surfaces, the smell of mirrored surfaces.
It adds light.
And you already touched on this, my last question, synesthesia and a synesthete. That was so fascinating. You said you almost have a psychic experience. Please talk to that.
I don't know if I'd call it psychic, but it's definitely strange.
Intuitive.
I think the art world calls it a blessing, and the world of science calls it a disease. It's when you use one sense to understand another, automatically and involuntarily. And so they say maybe Beethoven was a synesthete because his sense of hearing was very bad, yet he still created all this beautiful music. Kandinsky is said to have 4 different types of synesthesia, which is amazing because when you look at his work, it's so emotional and it touches you on so many levels that you understand it's beyond just the colors he's using. There's something else there. And so when I smell anything, I automatically, involuntarily see colors, and that's the way I construct the sense, and that's the way I speak to the client and translate their brand identity back into an olfactive vision.
Dawn, thank you. That was absolutely beautiful to listen to you. And Kandinsky, I think, might be a math and science gene for Carter, as a matter of fact. We should have thought of that. So thank you very much, Dawn. Our next designer is TUUR van BALEN. He's coming over from London, and that is where, along with his partner, Revital Cohen, whom he met at the Royal College of Art, he runs a London-based experimental practice, as he calls it, that operates on the border of art and design. The practice creates and produces fictional objects, photographs, videos exploring the juxtaposition of the natural with the artificial, and I am quoting from their website because it doesn't get better than this. What inspires them are designer species, composed wilderness, and mechanical organs. They set out to create post-human bodies, bespoke metabolisms, unnatural animals, and poetic machines. Some of their recent works are entitled Genetic Heirloom, Pigeon Door, Synthetic Immune System, Electrolyte Appendix, and they have created a recipe for controlling melancholy. Please, TUUR, can you talk to some of these projects and show us some images and help us understand how you and your partner arrived at this particular edge of design?
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me as well. So, Koen van Balen is the name of our experimental practice. We call ourselves a practice because we're not quite sure if we still are designers. We have a design background, but we don't create any objects that end up in shops. We create objects for different purposes. They're fictional, they're speculative, and so we use a lot of video and photography to lure people into these scenarios and these worlds we build. This is one of the early projects we've started working on. It's called Artificial Biological Clock. We did it in 2008, and it literally is an artificial biological clock. So a lot of our work deals with technology, but we're not very interested in how technology works. Neither are we very interested in explaining people how technology works. Really what we're interested in is what does technology mean when it enters our everyday life? You know, what's the impact of technology? And so one of those impacts we were quite inspired by is that technologies like the birth control pill, but also artificial lighting or watches, sort of distorts our perception of time. And not just time, but also biological time. And in particularly, we were sort of inspired by women losing the urge to reproduce. So there's a lot of sort of science studies as to women are sort of, you know, they're not getting babies at the time at which it's biologically best to make babies due to their career decisions or things like that. And so to replace for this lost instinct, we made an artificial biological clock. So the way it works is it's quite an aesthetic object that it would sit sort of probably on the mantelpiece object in your house. And so what it does is it's got these balls, and every 28 days, one ball kind of goes through all of the cogs, and it rolls out, and it sort of reminds someone of the eggs being limited. But also, it's connected to the internet, because it's not just a biological decision anymore to make babies. And it's connected to 3 feeds on the internet. It's connected to your psychologist, your GP, your general practitioner, your doctor, but also to your bank manager. And so these people would sort of, you know, gently indicate whether it's a good point for you to conceive. This is another early project in 2008 as well, and life support. And we were interested in, this is a video, we were interested in the notion of a cyborg. What does that mean, a cyborg? You know, this sort of mythological creature which is half technology, half human being. And we went looking for cyborgs. And we went looking for cyborgs in our hospitals. So this is a video which you can see on our website in which we interview a lot of kidney dialysis patients. These are people that for hours, probably 2 or 3 times a week, have to have their whole blood pumped out of their body into a machine that cleans the blood, and it's been pumped back into them. And we didn't ask them questions about their disease, but we asked them questions about their relationship to this machine. We asked them questions like, are you a cyborg? And it is a very complicated relationship, you know. And also we were wondering that, you know, if you're blind, how come you get this beautiful, cute dog, but if your kidneys fail, you get this horrible computer? So we kind of came up with these multiple scenarios in which, this is the first scenario, in which we used a transgenic lamb as a kidney dialysis machine. And I think I've got a diagram of how it works. There's obviously connotations between sleeping and sheep. But the way it works is, and it was based on research done by scientists who were trying to create sheep, pigs, and cows with human-compatible blood. They were trying to create these animals for blood transfusion purposes. But we figured, well, why would you slaughter the animal and take its blood? Why not just keep the animal and use it as a kind of machine? So you would have a transgenic lamb made that has your blood, compatible with your blood type. And during the day, it would just kind of roam about. It would be your pet. It would urinate all the toxins. And at night, it would sleep next to you and be your dialysis machine. This is the second machine in this life support series, in which we used a disused greyhound dog as a mechanical ventilator. Greyhound dogs are being bred by the thousands. Every year in the UK, 10 to 20,000 greyhound dogs are euthanized because they're useless to the racing industry. So racing with dogs, betting on dog racing is very big. So you could actually argue that these dogs, they are products already. They're bred, in packs of tens of hundreds, perhaps, for racing purposes. You could actually say they're designed products to race. And in our scenario, again, instead of euthanizing these dogs after their racing career, they would be retrained by the National Health Service to become a life support machine. So it's a fully external harness that pumps air into your lungs from the greyhound lungs. It's the dog with the biggest lung volume. And the treadmill you see in the photograph, that's the interface. Because what if an animal is part of a machine? How does the interface work? How do you switch it on? How do you switch it off? How do you turn it up? So the way it works here is there's a little button at the back of this treadmill, and when you press it, the rabbit moves. And the dog's being trained to follow a rabbit, so he runs faster and pumps more air into your lungs. So when we talk about unnatural animals, it's not a coincidence that for these two scenarios we chose lambs and greyhound dogs. Two animals that in essence are products already. The lamb we used for our photo shoot was slaughtered a few weeks after to eat. And these greyhound dogs, also the one we used for our photo shoot, was a retired dog from the racing tracks. Please interrupt me if you have questions, okay?
No, you keep going.
Okay.
I have all sorts of thoughts that I want to try and get your comments on after you've finished a few more.
Perfect. This project's called Pigeon d'Or, and we did in 2010 is when it started. Again, this is a video, so I'll bring up this image. Basically what we did is we worked with scientists, and in particularly people doing synthetic biology, to make a bacteria that can make a pigeon shit soap. So that sounds pretty simple, but it turned out to be pretty difficult. I'll explain you a little bit. This is roughly what a bacteria look like. Synthetic biology, I won't explain you how it works exactly, but it's a sort of upcoming science which we're quite excited about. Not necessarily because of what it can do, but mostly because it has this potential to be very open and accessible. Synthetic biology is also bringing about a big culture of biohacking. So this means a lot of amateurs, different people, not just scientists engaging with this. And what they do is they reprogram bacteria by rewriting the DNA of the bacteria to add functions to that bacteria. So a bacteria roughly looks like this, and that big sort of spaghetti in the middle, that's its DNA. A bacteria, in essence, is a little chemical factory. It's got loads of olfactory potential, because most of them stink. And if you could, for example, talking about olfactory, one of the things early undergraduate students have done is reprogramming these bacteria to smell like mint or bananas, just by rewriting the DNA code. So what we've done is we rewrote this bacteria to produce lipase, a sort of biological soap. We wanted to make a biological soap so the bacteria can live inside the pigeon, and then the pigeon would sort of, in its gut, would metabolize, it would produce soap and shit soap. To do this, we actually had to collaborate with quite a few scientists, and we had to add to this particular the registry of standard biological parts. So this is a big sort of database of biological parts, which in essence are like bits of DNA code you can use. And we were hoping that we could use from this kind of, you know, existing Lego box to make our bacteria, but we couldn't. So we had to go further than that and create a specific part. And then we thought it'd be funny to then add that part into this registry. So there's this big database which is openly accessible but mostly used by scientists. But one of these parts is created by us, which we're quite proud of. So that's in essence the DNA code of that bacteria. It's literally just a 800 times ATCNG. You can compare it to 1 and 0. It's literally almost like computer coding. But we weren't just interested in the technology. Again, this is a video. You should really go to our website and have a look at these videos, because we spend a lot of time with pigeon fanciers. Pigeon fanciers are mostly middle-aged men that keep pigeons for racing purposes. I know, for example, in the States, I'm not sure how big it is, but I know Mike Tyson is a pigeon fancier. The Queen of England is a pigeon fancier. And both in London, where we live, and in Belgium, where I'm from originally, pigeon fancing is a very serious hobby. There's a lot of money going around as well, just like in the dog racing. But we were interested in this idea that if these technologies would open up, not just to scientists, but to anyone, you know, would pigeon fanciers become scientists, or would scientists become pigeon fanciers? And after that, we created, again, a sort of series of speculative objects. So this is a first object, which inspired by these pigeon fanciers, because these are the experts on how to interact with pigeons. This is an object that allows these pigeons to live on your windowsill. So they're trapped on the right side. They're trapped inside this device, which is inspired by these pigeon fanciers' devices. And it allows you to select them, to feed them different bacteria, and to send them out back into the city. And we were interested in this idea of the city as this big organism. And by putting bacteria in a pigeon and putting the pigeon in the city, you sort of interact with the city in this biological manner. This is a second device which allows you to trap these pigeons on top of your car. When you park it, they would eat the bacteria and defecate and clean your windshield. You can fold it up again. Again, pigeons are very, very sort of unnatural animals to start with. If you think about pigeons, I'm not sure if Miami has a lot of pigeons, but London has an awful lot of them. People consider them flying rats. They're an urban pest. But on the other hand, all these pigeons, they actually have a very controlled evolution, because for generations and generations, we've been breeding them to come home quicker. This is, for example, one of the reasons why even Charles Darwin was interested in pigeons, because he could study this controlled evolution. So these are the actual pigeons of Charles Darwin. He became a pigeon fancier, and they're being kept in some natural history museum in London.
So before you go on to another
Yes,
project,
please.
What I'm getting is that you are addressing the technological Armageddon of 2012 and beyond, and your idea is to reintroduce or make an intervention between biological and natural factors to kind of vision our way forward. And out of this, you are making these beautiful sculptural objects that can be part of a kind of social, energetic experiment. Here's my question. Does anyone buy this stuff? Do you once you've finished with your project, can you and will you sell these beautiful objects? That's question one. Question two is, has anyone approached you to actually, from a hospital or from a laboratory, to actually create solutions, which is exactly what Be Open is here to support you designers in doing?
Yeah, I think both are really, really good, valid questions. On the first one, I think I think design, we create these objects because design proves a very powerful way to engaging a lot of people with the possible implications of technologies. So we're not interested in predicting the future. We don't even really believe in the future. You know, there's all these sort of possible futures out there. And what we were interested in is to use design to build a speculation, to point towards a potential future, you know, whether that's a very likely future or not. But we're interested in these kind of grey futures. We're not interested in clear utopias or dystopias. We're not interested in totally impossible futures. We're interested in sort of using design to take people into this little world just for a little bit when they encounter these objects, whether it's on the net or in an exhibition, and to sort of question what would this mean. So in that sense, we're not interested in creating products that end up being mass-produced in a shop. So we occasionally do sell them. We sold, for example, the artificial biological clock is in the collection of the MoMA. But they're sort of more sold as art pieces than as designed objects that end up in shops. And I think as to your second question, I think we sort of believe that a lot of this material, when you talk about new technologies and the way they would, you know, the relationship between us and our bodies, as that's mediated by medical technologies, is a very, very complicated relationship. And I think we want to acknowledge that we don't really fully control that. We don't really fully understand that. So in a sense that we believe before creating these solutions, before providing these answers, it's very important to first ask the right questions. And so that is what our own autonomous work is trying to do. However, we do also operate as a design studio occasionally where we help you know, either medical companies or other companies. But it's not, I don't think we end up designing particular solutions, rather sort of we help them explore the context they might be working in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time through doing work like this for companies.
And I'm just wondering, is there anyone out there besides Be Open who is approaching you to actually work on a serious and a material project to come up with a solution? Or are you really seen as an artist and a designer as opposed to a solver of these epic questions?
Yeah, I think we don't really care much about the labels, not that much anymore. You know, we don't really sort of pitch ourselves as artists or as designers. We both have a background in design and are probably at the moment operating in a world which is more the art world. We do occasionally get, I mean, you know, I was approached by a little town in Spain to try and make all of their pigeons shit soap. Which I sort of tried to explain to them that this wasn't really about proposing that all pigeons shit soap. It was make us reflect differently on our environment and our natural and urban environment. So we don't really create design solutions as much as we are approached and do commissions, both galleries as well as companies. So we do work like this occasionally for companies as well.
So if you could run through a few more of your slides. We're running out of time,
yep.
But please give us a little bit of a tour.
I'll do this one very quickly. It's got a lot of video, so again, you'll have to look on the website, but it's one that's particularly about eating, so perhaps relevant in this audience. Basically, what we did is we came up with a recipe for controlling melancholy. And so what we did is we presented synthetic biology and this kind of new biotechnology, and we presented it as cooking. You know, if I see these scientists do these things, to me, it makes a lot more sense if I think about cooking. They're following a recipe to come up with some result, and it's kind of, they don't fully understand it. There's a bit of chemistry and biology involved. So the way our recipe works, it was inspired by Hippocrates and his theory of the four humours, in which he said that we were all these walking sacks of four fluids, and all of these fluids were linked to a particular emotional state. So we were particularly interested in those four fluids are yellow bile, blood, phlegm, and black bile. And we were really interested in black bile because we now know, contemporary science knows, that there is no such thing as black bile in our body. And he linked black bile to melancholy. It's the literal translation from Greek. And so we came up with this idea of using synthetic biology to sense in your blood your emotional state, and particularly the serotonin levels, i.e. how happy you are. And so the recipe uses this yeast, which is again one of these bacteria-style organisms that are fairly easily manipulated. Oh, yeah, this is the video bit. This is the bloody bit. And so we used a recipe that we cook with a leech that has first fed itself on, in this case, my blood. And so the leech sort of acts as the biosensor. And obviously we were interested in this idea, this relationship between the parasite feeding itself on my blood and then us eating from the parasite. And then the yeast is in the marinade. And so we marinate the leech and have it work for a while. And then, again, these are all videos. And then we created this dish with it. So it's a mousse, a blood mousse, with little berry sauce and oyster mushrooms. And then I effectively ate it, which again is in this video. Yes?
TUUR, I'm not sure I'm going to come to your house for dinner, but if I have to go into the hospital, I'm going to call you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is MARIJE VOGELZANG. Thankfully, she made it here because there was weather in Europe, and thankfully, she is quick to point out that she's not a food designer, but an eating designer. Food is already perfectly designed by nature, she reminds us, and you put my designs inside of your body. Unlike other design under discussion today, Marije's is edible, therefore ephemeral. Food goes to the stomach, but like all design, she says, it can also activate the brain and cause memories and emotions. And since, as she points out, everybody eats food, everybody understands and has a relation to food, food connects us to culture, to society, to nature, to feeling. It was at Eindhoven that Marije began pondering food's design potential. Reeling against her and just about everyone's childhood programming, it was time for Marije to play with food, which then became her life's work. And much of Marije's design philosophy is recorded in her book, Eat Love. Fortunately, we have Marije here today to talk to us about her faked meat project and her vegetarian animal inventions, and how far the average pineapple travels and what it is like to be hand-fed by Hungarian gypsies. Marije, can I ask you at the start exactly when and how did you arrive at the decision to pursue or to create, actually, the category of eating design?
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Well, it's kind of interesting. I think 12 years ago, I was still a student at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. And there you saw that everybody was really busy in making designs for humans, because that's what we do. So we design chairs to sit on, cars to drive in, tables to eat from, and houses to live in. But what we really need to live, to be able not to die, is food. But for some reason, food was not a subject for design 12 years ago. It just didn't exist. So every day I went to school, I went to all the workshops, I was trying to find my perfect material. So I did things with plastics, I did things with wood, I did things with ceramics. Every day I went home to cook dinner, and I looked at my kitchen and I thought, well, this is a kind of workshop too. And I opened my cupboards and I thought, well, these are materials too, my ingredients. So why not make designs with this? And then, as you just said, if you're a designer and you start to work with food, you might think you're a food designer. But that would imply that I would actually design food. And I think food is perfectly designed by nature. I don't need to change anything about a pepper or anything else. But what I think is much more interesting is to look at the verb of eating. And then if you start to look at that, you start to open a whole new universe, connecting every human being, because we all need to eat. We all need to feed ourselves physically, but also emotionally. So my work is inspired by all the things that surround the act of eating. This is not a chronological story, but this is the first project I did with food. I started to work on the idea of the color white, and in many cultures white is the color of death. And in Western society the color of death is black. So in Holland, when we go to a funeral, we wear black and we go there. And we don't really have a lot of rituals around death. So we just get a slice of sponge cake, or if we're lucky, we get a roll with cheese. And that's it. So Dutch people don't really have a lot of rituals around mourning culture. But in many cultures, the color of death is white. And in many cultures, food is a very important part of the debarting process, which kind of makes sense because it's also comforting. Eating food and sharing food together, it's an act of comfort. So I made this completely white funeral dinner as a kind of alternative for all these poor Dutch people that don't have any rituals. And all the ingredients of this dinner are naturally white. And I'm not a chef, I'm not trained as a chef. I just like to play with food, as you just said. But I didn't really know what to do with it. I just started to prepare this food very simply, very pure. And I found out that actually all these white-colored food combined very well together. The colors, the flavors are very subtle, but also very strong and sharp and bitter. So in a way, it also reflects the feeling that you have when you are at a funeral very well. I have been working on this subject now for over 12 years, and every year people kept asking me to do a Christmas dinner. And I thought, well, you know, what can you do with a Christmas dinner? It's already overly designed in so many ways. What can a designer add to that? But then when Droog asked me to do a Christmas dinner, I thought, well, what is Christmas really about in essence? And I think it's about sharing and being together and feeling connected to each other, if you look at this besides the story of Jesus Christ. So when you just think about these things, then you can make a very simple intervention. I just took a table with normally the tablecloth hangs down to the floor, and now I took it up into the air and I made some slits in it, and that's it, very easy. So this is the situation. And there were 40 people that didn't know each other that were attending this dinner, and they were sitting like this in the tablecloth. So it's a strange situation. You're sitting somewhere with your head and your hands inside some space, and the rest of your body is outside. I had some reasons to do this. First of all, you're physically connected to each other. If I pull here, you can feel it there. Also, it's a kind of communist idea that you become more equal when you don't see your clothes, because your clothes reveal parts of your identity. So it suddenly becomes like one. Everybody is more the same. And the last thing is also that if you put lots of people in a funny situation, then you kind of start to bond immediately. So this is maybe even nicer to see the bags if you have to go to the bathroom during dinner. The first one was in Amsterdam, this one was in Tokyo, in Japan, and I was really scared that people wouldn't want to participate in my design. Because when people arrive, everybody was behaving very formal and bowing and handing over business cards. And I thought, oh my God, I think they're not going to want to do this. But once they sat down and put their heads through the tablecloth, it was as if their masks were falling off. People were becoming very playful, and very communicative and very sociable, which was a very interesting transaction to see. So, of course, it's not only the setting, it's really also about the food. But this also shows that I'm not a food designer, because you can see that this lady, she just has melon. It's just plain ripe melon. But you can see that her plate is cut in two. Everybody on her side of the table has the same dish. Everybody opposite of her has ham. Well, ham and melon is such a classical combination. You don't need to tell people what to do. People will just start to share their food naturally. That's what we like to do as human beings. We just start to share. The main course was the same idea. The first person would get a huge piece of rib. The second person would get a whole pumpkin stuffed with seeds and nuts and everything from the oven. The third person would get a complete lettuce. It would be clean, but it would have croutons and dressing and everything on top. And the last person would get the potatoes. And people just start to share, they start to cut things up, make a big mess, and be very happy together. This is a very small project, but it's very dear to me. It's a project I did in Rotterdam for the Historical Museum, and they had an exhibition about the Second World War. You might not know that Rotterdam has been severely bombed during the Second World War, and at the end of the war they had a time of starvation. So there was no food anymore, and people had to live from the scarcity that they had. They were eating tulip bulbs that they got from the ground. And what I did for this exhibition is I made first I collected recipes from the Resistance Museum, just handwritten recipes, and I prepared them very simply. I didn't change anything about it, but I made them into small snacks. And when you would enter, you would get a little coupon, and with the coupon you would get some surrogate coffee, and with the surrogate coffee you would get your ration of food, so your ration of little snacks. What happened there is that some people that were there were children during the time of war. They didn't have these flavors in their mouth for more than 65 years. And I think this really relates to what you have been talking about. They got back memories of the time that they were children, that they were there with their parents that were still alive, eating the food that they were eating back then, and having memories that they thought they were forgotten about, but suddenly they came back, and they were very dear to them. They were very painful memories, but also very beautiful ones. And for me, this really is the project that pointed out to me that as a designer, you can choose any material to work with, but there's just one material that enters your body, that becomes a part of your body, and that is as emotional as food is. And this makes me very grateful to work on this.
And Marije, something just occurred to me, that this eating design where everything goes through, it's also, in this particular project of yours, a cathartic, a sensorial experience. Yes, there is the remembrance from olfactive stimuli. Yes, there is taste. Yes, there is even sight that you're working with as well to create an amalgam experience ultimately as your result. So please go on.
Thanks. So I'm really inspired by daily life, by just normal, average things. And of course, food is the thing that we do every day. So for me, that's the great subject. I love to go to supermarkets, and right now we have this thing going on with vegetarian alternatives. So next to the meat aisle, we have this ever-growing aisle, because it's really an emerging market to make substitutes for the vegetarian market. So it's fake meat, what we see. Many times it's made from soy as a base product. And what I'm really puzzled about is that when you don't want to eat meat and you want to buy a vegetarian alternative, why does this look like meat? Because we can get vegetarian balls, we can get vegetarian schnitzel, vegetarian burgers, vegetarian minced, vegetarian sausage. But if you don't have an animal with guts, why would you want to make a sausage in a sausage shape? It doesn't make sense to me. And if you make a vegetarian alternative from this kind of shapeless soy protein product, you can make any shape. Why don't we just invent new animals? So what you see here is the herbast. This is a small animal, it's like this big. It lives in the herbal fields of Albania, where it runs through the fields. And it has to be secure not to be eaten by other animals. So it's covered with a fur made of herbs for protection and for camouflage. And because the fur is already made from herbs, you can just put the stir-fried chops in your pan and it's already pre-seasoned and you don't have to add any herbs as a seasoning. Also, this animal is square-shaped, which is really convenient for packaging, transport, and at the table everybody gets an equal share. This is the ponti. This is a small rodent-like animal that lives in empty volcanoes in Haiti. And this animal eats the ashes from the volcanoes, and therefore the taste of the meat is lightly smoked. Also, this animal has a very firm tail because it needs to make burrow in these magma layers. And because it has this firm tail, it's a great party snack because you can just pick it up by the tail and have clean hands. This is the ponti from up close. And this is the bikyo. This is a vegetarian fish. It lives in the shallow waters of Japan where it feeds itself on the seaweed that grows there. And because it eats a lot of seaweed, it has a very high level of antioxidants, which the real connoisseur can see by the green stripes that it has in the meat. Because it's aesthetically attractive as well, you can use it for sushi and sashimi and these kinds of ways of preparing. This is how it looks like in the supermarket. And this is the last animal. This is a bird. It's called the sapiku, and it lives in Canada, where it lives in the maple trees and it feeds itself of the sap of the trees, and therefore the taste of the meat is naturally sweet. So it's a dessert meat, and it goes very well with ice cream and chocolate. This is the making of the meat. These were prototypes. We made them for marzipan because in Holland we have a very big tradition on making marzipan meat. Well, we just make pigs actually. But I have been working now with a producer of vegetarian alternative products. So they just make this kind of shapeless stuff. And we have been making the ponti. And I did an exhibition where for the opening we were barbecuing the pontis. And some vegetarians didn't want to eat it because they didn't trust it was real, well, non-meat meat. And also someone told me that he had been Googling ponti because he thought it was a real animal, which I thought was quite a nice story.
So, Marije, I know you have a video to show us.
Yeah.
And would you like to set that up a little bit? And then I guess the rest will be
We're running out of time?
A little bit, yeah.
All right. I can just say one word with the next slides, okay? Marshmallow clouds made with real rainwater. Icebergs that melt in your hot chocolate for inner global warming. Sugar spoon melts in your tea, no dishes to do. A lollipop that shows what sugar does to your body. And well, this is the longer story, so this is my daughter who is really cute. Look at my cute daughter. I made her eat her vegetables by doing that. I was invited to do a project with gypsies in Hungary, and for me that was kind of weird because I had never been to Hungary and I had never met any gypsies. But for me, I was interested to consider them as any other minority group. And I was also interested in hand feeding because it's a very strange thing to do. You get fed by your mother when you're a child, and maybe when you grow up you get fed by your lover, but you never get fed by a stranger. Only maybe when you grow old again and you become disabled and then someone feeds you. But it's a very intimate act. You really have to trust someone.
Tell us about the project. You arrived in Hungary and...
You have to imagine it was a white space with 10 tables, small tables on extended legs, so they were quite high. And they were covered with tablecloth until the floor. And we were inviting people to sit underneath the table, just as a child you would sit underneath the table as you have your little tent. And then we had 10 gypsy ladies that would sit in front of you and would sit there and feed you the food, their own personal gypsy food, not very culinary special, just plain farmer's food.
And where did you find the gypsies?
It was actually through a lady that worked for the Dutch embassy, and she was in touch with a theater company that had some ladies working there. And when we started, we had these ladies, and I told them about the idea because I wanted them to feed you, but also tell their life story at the same time. So you would be given their food, but you will also hear their life story. So it's an intertwined storytelling and feeding situation. But I really had to find a way to make it accessible to be fed, because it's such a intimate thing. It's very scary to be fed. It's very unpleasant. If you can make eye contact, then you really don't want to be fed by someone, because you just think, oh, I have to smile, and you start to behave like you think you should behave. But I wanted you to really relax and undergo the situation. So that's why you're sitting in this tent and you can't see the woman who is feeding you. And I also did that because I didn't want you to know who it was that fed you. Because if you would see her, then you might think, oh yeah, I hate old gypsies, but she's nice. And now I wanted people to make the generalization that if you would walk down the street and see a gypsy lady walking there, then you might think, oh, maybe it's her, or maybe it's her brother. It's Immanuel Kant that said, if you break bread with each other, you can't break each other's neck. So I was thinking from the idea is that once you are fed by someone, you have to like this person. You cannot hate someone that fed you. That's the starting point of this idea.
And the food itself, what did you have the gypsies feeding people?
It was really simple. Some woman, she had memories of oranges, so she was just feeding oranges, or just some bread with some grease, some I think it's just pork fat. It's really simple food.
So Roma recipes didn't really come into it?
Yeah, but it's like the basic Roma food.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So this was really more about an encounter that gets transferred through the act of feeding and then the swallowing, once again, of the material going through your body to create this cathartic emotional experience.
Yeah, what happened was that most people that undergo the performance were very touched. Some came out crying. It was a very emotional event. And the most left-wing newspaper and the most right-wing newspaper started to write about it and started to make the debate again about gypsy integration in society. And I didn't intend this to happen, but they started to write about it in a more human way because of this project, which I was really happy about.
And the gypsies, how did they do?
That was very nice, because when we started, they said, yeah, I don't know who is going to be interested in my story, because every day they are being discriminated, every day they are being rejected. So they really didn't think that people would be interested. But in this setting, in this very intimate setting, people were very interested and wanted to hear more. And some of them said, yeah, it was too short. I want to know who this person is. I want to see who she is. And so it was very nice to see that they also grew, because normally gypsies are the ones that are being given things. So they get charity, they get pity, they get discrimination. So they are the receiving party. But now they were the giving party. They were very strong, giving their stories and giving their food. And that really made them grow. You really could see them, you could see them growing, and that was really very strong.
Well, Marije, I know you're disappointed about the video,
Yes.
so am I, but it is on your website.
It is, yeah.
Is that correct? And could you just say the address now so people can look it up?
Yeah, it's MARIJEVOGELZANG.com, so it's just my name. Oh, .nl, sorry. .nl. It's my name. You can see it in the papers.
.nl for the Netherlands.
.nl, yes.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much. Next, we have two designers, Jamie ZIGELBAUM and Marcela COELHO, and they have a studio just opened in New York, correct? You just moved from Boston to New York. So they're based in Cambridge and New York. And they are described as operating at the intersection of design, technology, science, and art. Their work utilizes physical, computational, and cultural materials in the service of creating new, but fundamentally human experiences. Fortunately, we have both of them here today to explore and dissect for us as a collective human experience here and now this vital and timely intersection, the subject and the locus of their work. Both designers are alumni of the MIT Media Lab, which I hope you'll talk a little bit more about to us, and have recently worked on a variety of projects for private collections, museums, and hotels. And I would like to mention that both designers are the inventors of computers, one being a paper computer, which I'd also like to hear a little bit about. And they both specialize in multidisciplinary cognitive, scientific, shape-changing, compositional, human-computer borderline milieu. And this also encompasses interactive garments and edible circuits. Let's hear about those, please. Thank you.
Hey everybody, how's everybody doing? Okay? Our presentation's like 4 hours. It's gonna be fast.
It's gonna be great.
It's gonna go by really quickly.
All right, so to start, there you go. So Jamie and I met at the Media Lab at MIT, and we both come from very different backgrounds that are like the mixed science, technology, fine arts, design. And a lot of the work that we do is really interested and concerned on this idea of getting computers out of their box and out of their screens and putting them into the physical world and combining with all the stuff that's sort of around us. Really kind of enriching these experiences that we have with computation and with information today. So we're going to show a lot of the work that we do and kind of explain to you how that happens through this work. And feel free to jump in whenever I'm talking.
Okay.
So this is a project called Dinnerware. It's kind of a bit of a crazy experiment, really trying to push the boundaries of how you can combine computers with materials. In the case, the material is food. So what I did is I created this plate that has electrodes all around it. And it's a plate that has electrodes all around it. And there are LEDs connected to those electrodes that light up on the plate. So if you put food right in the middle of it, it becomes part of the circuit. So in the process of eating with this dinnerware, you end up changing the quality of those lights. So it becomes kind of very interactive experience where the food is part of this electronic circuit. What's really interesting about this project is that it was kind of a bit of this crazy experiment, and it was really nice hearing you talk before, Marie, because what I did is I went to my kitchen as well, and I brought a multimeter, which is this tool they use for measuring conductivity of materials. And I started measuring the conductivity of tomatoes and soy sauce and rice to see how they would behave electrically. And then you use that as a way to create recipes. So it's like, oh, if I combine this thing that's really conductive with this other thing, then I can get this kind of electrical property. And I'm a terrible cook. I actually totally suck at it. And I had you know that, yeah, all right. And I had a dinner at my place with the stuff, and I invited a couple of friends to come over. And it was really interesting to see how they, just by changing this very simple thing in this plate, my friends started stealing food from each other and sort of licking the plate, and then these really bizarre things, right? They totally took apart this very ritualized experience, which is eating at a table with somebody else, just by introducing this tiny little bit of technology. I don't know if you can tell very well from this image, but this is an example of the first personal computer. And by personal computer, I mean the computer that's made to be put in the home. What's really interesting about this design is that it was a computer for storing recipes. It had the worst computer interface in the world. It had a bunch of little lights and switches. But it also came with a counter, right? So you could cut vegetables and as you pull out recipes from your computer. And what's interesting about cooking is that if you look at the history, I mean, we've been cooking for thousands of years, right? Like forever, basically. And if you look at design recently, design has changed a lot, everything that we do today in design, we use computers, we design circuit boards, make enclosures, everything is digital in some ways. And I think that in some ways everybody is a food designer, everybody cooks, everybody makes something. Even if you hate it, you've done it once in your life. And I thought it was really important to kind of explore this area a little bit. And started working on this kind of series of concept designs of this future machines for the digital fabrication of food, trying to understand the kinds of things that you could explore if you combine digital fabrication, which is a design tool that we use today, with cooking. And these are total concept designs. These machines do not exist. But this is an example of this robotic chef, where ideally you could put any kind of edible thing that already exists into it, like a banana or a steak, and the machine can process it. So you could imagine, for instance, you could have a blur filter for a steak, right? It will cook fat in a very specific way. This is an example of a modeling machine, kind of combining a different property, or in this case, you can create the geometry of the food that you're eating and experiment with things like texture and just geometry and designs. This is another example of something else that would be interesting to try, which is to create this mixing machine, right? You can parametrically combine ingredients. So you could say, I want to make a chocolate candy, and I want to combine chocolate and strawberries. So give me every variation of 1% increment of chocolate, so I can decide which one is the one that I like. And we're missing one image here, but after this concept designs, I was like, okay, I'm going to try and see if I can make one of these machines and see if it works. And what I did is I ended up creating this tiny little guy that has this sort of chocolate extruders with walnut extruders as well. And
It was the probably first 3D printer for food that was functional. It's too bad. It's on our website if you want to look.
yeah, it's a tiny little machine, and what it does is it lets you create custom candies. And what's interesting about that is that all of a sudden you have digital control over the exact thing that you're eating, which might seem kind of weird, but it's very interesting if you start thinking about the other kinds of things you have digital control over, right? All of a sudden you can design food, you can send it to a friend over Facebook, and they can rate it, they can parametrically adapt it, send it back to you, and so on.
So where can you find these beautiful things? Are they on display anywhere? Has any one of them gone into production?
So the chocolate extruder was a prototype. Some parts of it worked really well, some parts worked terribly. It didn't last very long. There's a prototype at MIT right now. We also show the prototype around a couple different museums that are doing specific exhibitions on digital fabrication. But there are a lot of plans to try to get that out there and see if we create a market for it and see. Food is this huge space, so you really kind of have to figure out what part of it is the one that you want to try. And building a machine like this is really complex.
And other spaces where you've gone, are you going to show us?
Yes. So in 2010, right, Jamie and I got this award from Design Miami, and it was called the Design of the Future Award. And they came to us and they were like, hey, here's this really awesome opportunity. Build something that you think represents the future of design. And for us, is what I was trying to mention before, is the idea that computers and materials are going to get combined one day, and they're going to really sort of come out of the screen, and they're going to be able to interact with them.
And so in a lot of our work, we use contemporary materials, like as some of the things you've seen, we use software, we use electronics, we use new materials, fabrication processes, not just because we're nerds. Actually, the technology itself
I'm not a nerd.
is not that interesting, but our entire world is now made of these materials, and it's really important to explore them and to push them into strange configurations, to explore their hidden contours so that we can understand more about what they mean for us. If you think about the amount of information we push through our minds, through interfaces, through machines, then back to other people, how these forms shape all those thoughts is super important. And one that's everywhere is the screen, the liquid crystal screen. And so this piece, 640 by 480, we took the screen and we break it apart into pixels that can exist in the body space, because liquid crystal screens are non-spatial. Everything is behind the screen. You can't touch it. The pixel is this entity, this fundamental unit of digital representation, a visual representation today, yet it makes no sense with the body. So here you can take the pixel out from the screen and play with it in a way that makes more sense physically. And this is a video that will hopefully play. This would have been a good one to show. Sorry about that.
So sorry.
Maybe we can do a dance and interpretive dance of our videos.
Okay. Well, let's give it one more shot. Well, so the way that you can interact with the pixels is when you touch them, Maybe we have another image that we can show. When you touch them, they change color, and if you touch two, it can clone the color from one into the next. And then you can also manipulate them in aggregate with the remote control from afar, and you can paint them with colors and animations. And all of this to question and access notions of visual representation. You know, what do these screens mean in our culture, and how they fit in with human experience of the 3D world?
Yeah, there's a particularly interesting thing about this project that we did, which is if you have two boxes, you can touch one of them, and if you touch a second one, you can transfer data from one to the other. So they'll synchronize their colors, which is effectively something like copy and paste, right, that you do with your computer. But in this case, you're doing it with your body. You're this kind of entity that connects two physical things, and you become the conduit of information between them. And I think, like, in general, too, like, a lot of the stuff that we do comes out from this frustration, right, that, like, in some ways, we hate computers because they're behind this glass, and that's kind of why we want to take them out and put them out in the world.
And the space for looking at visual representation is huge. I mean, why we use the type of displays we use today is not because those are the best displays in the world. There are many other ways to create dynamic visual representations. This image on the left is the subpixel array from a normal LCD screen that might be on your phone or on a computer. And this is the way that we make them. Each of these are little liquid crystal shutters with filters, and they're normally square or rectangular, but you can also do them circularly. And when you start to think about the units of color like halftone or older printing processes and how that changed the visual output, and then think about that in the digital space. So we made another piece called Resolution for a museum out west, and it's similar. It's made up of all these luminous particles, and you can manipulate them, but they pack differently, and the type of images this gives rise to is different just based on that simple difference. And you can also manipulate these in aggregate, and we spent a lot of work playing with ways that you can paint with remote controls to be able to put images into this substrate somehow.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you have a medium that's a medium of light, we made it so you could paint it with light. So we have this infrared remote control that lets you, like, you can move the remote control in space and paint all this little box with different colors.
And so we have a few slides to show a bit of our process. Often people get a little scared by technology and think it's this thing that's outside of normal design practice or art practice. But we don't feel that way. We use this stuff very closely and intimately, and we make rapid prototypes. Here's a 3D print of one of the form studies for Resolution. We play with the forms over and over again, and we try the materials and try and make sure all the different sensory channels that are going to come from this object make sense to convey the concept.
Yeah, I think it's important too to understand that a lot of the times people look at our work and they see it and they're like, oh, this looks like an electronic product, you know, it looks like somebody could buy it from Apple or something. But they don't realize that stuff is, like, the stuff that we make is incredibly handcrafted. Like, a lot of it is really put together by hand. It's designed by hand in all its different levels. So that's kind of why it's cool to show this stuff so you understand, like, where it comes from.
And so we do this circuit board design ourselves, and here's one of our PCBs. And then this is an injection molding process for the enclosures for Resolution. And there's a couple slides missing, but we do all the assembly in-house in our studio in Cambridge. And then the last thing we want to show quickly is a new project. This is the first, I think, one of the first times we've shown it, that we're working on right now called Pulse. And in the same way that we're really interested in using contemporary materials to expose aspects of technology in our digital world, we can also use it to expose other invisible forces around us, and in this case, entrainment. And entrainment is this behavior of the physical world first noted by a Dutch physicist in the 1600s who was a clockmaker, and he invented the pendulum clock. And when you put pendulum clocks on the wall, he found that the pendulums over time would all move in phase. They would move at the same time, no matter when he started them. And the reason for this that's come to light over the years is that the clocks are equalizing shear stress through the wall, and just the small motion of each pendulum is affecting the other clocks. They're bound together. So entrainment is this property of oscillating systems to synchronize over time. And so this project is trying to expose that we're all actually kind of connected by these materials and forces in ways that we don't always see.
And what's interesting about entrainment too is that it happens both in the physical world and the biological world. And that's kind of what we're trying to combine, is really looking at how the physical things and ourselves are sort of part of the same ecology of stuff.
And it works across non-organic and organic materials. These are metronomes, and this video shows them all going into phase within about 30 seconds. But also the cardiomyocytes in your heart, the cells that make your heart beat, they use a similar process, feedback loops, in order to beat together. And people's voices in conversation, the frequencies will entrain. Many cycles of people in the organic world around us will synchronize like this. So we've made these 3 towers, and they all light up. And we're working on a room scale installation with the Creators Project that'll debut next year. And all of these towers have their own internal respiration. They're kind of breathing with light by the light pulsing up and down. And then once the people go into this space, here's an early lighting study of one of the towers. They start to sense you. And as you get closer to them, they react. And then if you touch it, it takes your heart rate in about 2 seconds. And then it entrains automatically with your body's cycles. And then that spreads out through the room as a kind of subtle color change, which then interacts with the other people in the room, kind of bringing everyone into this phase lock over time.
And then where do you see all that going once everyone has been accepted and entrained, and then everyone is harmonizing? Then what?
Well, hopefully that'll show, hopefully you'll be able to experience this invisible force in a way that you might not have before.
So you could create world peace, for instance.
That's the main goal.
That's the idea.
We'd have to make a really big installation for that.
Well, we can start here in the tent, actually.
But it's amazing that using one of the things that interactive technologies in particular allow you to do, as opposed to looking at static representations, is create experiences that unfold over time, and they're behaviors. And rather than representing a notion, you could write about entrainment, we can actually present it firsthand, so you experience entrainment directly through these materials that we have.
And do you have any practical applications in mind, at the university level or at the psychological kind of field level?
No.
No, really.
Not yet. It has great potential, wouldn't you agree?
Well, I mean, it's strange you ask that question too, because I did an undergrad in fine arts, right, and eventually ended up finding myself like at MIT, and that question gets asked at MIT a lot. Like people come to me, they're like, why are you doing this? What is it for? Is it patentable? But a lot of the times you have to say, I don't care, and you make it, and then people see and they experience it. And when they experience it, they see something else that they hadn't seen before, and they understand why you've made it and why it's important. So even though you can't articulate a problem that you're solving with it, you're kind of more creating an idea and a way of thinking and talking about things.
Well, and this is at the crux of Be Open's mission, it would seem. Bring it, and then let's see what happens, and let's see where we go from here. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to add on to what Marcelo was saying, is that it's important to make things that aren't going to be used for practical applications. I mean, the purpose of this work is to communicate these ideas and experiences. It's artwork, it's design work, it's conceptual. And rather than take that and then try and productize it, I think that we can communicate better through focusing on that part of the work. And maybe, hopefully, as I have in my, I spent years doing next generation interface design and for, working at a startup and trying to make products to change the world. And I was inspired in a lot of that through the art that I had seen and through the books that I'd read. And hopefully that's the type of impact a project like this would be our goal to have.
I completely understand and also admire the open-endedness of what you present, but I can't help but leaping, to this idea of at a corporate meeting or at a diplomatic meeting or something that everyone can be harmonized as such, So please keep going. And what were you going to say?
Oh no, I was going to say that I think what's fascinating about the work that we do, that fascinates us about it, is that it doesn't matter how hard we try to understand how this stuff is going to be used, we never know what's going to happen. And a lot of the times it's like very particular kinds of behaviors emerge that you didn't quite predict. And we're curious to see what's going to happen with this project, right? Like once you sort of put your heart rate into this tower and you start synchronizing with somebody else, how is that going to affect your relationship with them? And it might turn out that might not be in a good way, or it might turn out to be in an amazing way. And
or a completely unexpected way.
Always. There's always unexpected results.
It's so abstruse for someone like me who comes more from the creative world, and it sounds like you do too. I'm just wondering at MIT how they supported you and kind of escorted you into a place like this in the Media Lab. Can you talk to that a little?
Yeah, so I don't know if you know, or if the audience knows about the Media Lab and how it works, but the Media Lab is, it's a lab and a kind of a department at MIT that's made out of all these different research groups. There are about 30 different research groups in all these different areas, covering every kind of part of knowledge you can think of.
And which department, sorry?
It's part of the Department of Architecture. But then it's kind of its own separate lab. So there's people doing neuroscience work or engineering and computer science and
a little bit of design. John Maito was a professor there for years.
And so you kind of throw everybody into this place and get them to work together. And so then you get a scientist hanging out with an artist or a designer, kind of encountering the same things and start talking about projects and doing classes together. And that's where a lot of the work kind of emerges. So at the Media Lab, it's really interesting. In particular for me, I don't know for you, but when I came in from fine arts, and it was what am I doing at MIT? I should not be here. I have no idea what these people are talking about. And very quickly, you actually realize that you're extremely valuable, because you can look at something and say, hey, you should look at this through this entirely different lens. You're going to see something very different that you're not seeing right now. And that was something that I really learned in art school, and I could bring in.
Well, and exactly on that note, I think that is a summarization of exactly what we've been talking about here today through all the various disciplines. And I want to thank everyone very much for being here, as a matter of fact, and to Jamie and Marcelo, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Finally, we have Carter Cleveland. And by the way, we are instructed to remember this name in a recent Forbes magazine article and in an art info piece entitled The 30 and Under Crowd, the art world's most influential young figures of 2012. Carter was also cited this year in Business Insider's 25 and Under Meet the Rising Stars in New York Tech. All this as founder and CEO of ART.SY, a free platform where users can discover, research, and collect art with the mission to make all of the world's art accessible to anyone with an internet connection. ART.SY is powered by the Art Genome Project, which creates pathways for discovering art through 1,211 plus characteristics called genes. Through the Art Genome Project, ART.SY establishes connections between art historical movements, subject matter, and formal qualities, creating infinite serendipitous opportunities for users to discover and to learn. Long before Carter Cleveland's editorial kudos and sinecures, he was traipsed around New York art galleries at the side of his critic writer father, and then went on to Princeton BSc in computer science shortly after his stints at NASA, City College of New York, and Citigroup. As a researcher and software developer, he launched ART.SY, which Carter will tell us about presently. Clearly, he is here at Art Basel and Design Miami, connecting and considering and corralling and perhaps even collecting a little, but why here on the talk stage, Carter? Tell us why and how you design the ART.SY experience.
Thanks so much for that, Jeff. It's an honor to be here, honor to be at Design Miami and speaking at the Be Open Forum.
As a computer science major with an art background, when was the moment and what was the leap that you took to design this ART.SY experience? We'll start there.
Well, one thing I want to be clear about first is I'm not actually the designer behind ART.SY as much as I would love to take credit for it. We have an incredible team of very talented designers, and they deserve all the credit for everything you see on ART.SY. I think the most I can hope to call myself as a collaborator or maybe a cheerleader.
Creator.
That's even better. The moment It was very gradual. It was, shades of gray, never a black and white thing. I was in my college dorm room senior year, and I was just looking online for art, and I assumed that there was a platform where you could access all the world's art. Similar platforms for film and for music had existed for over a decade at that point. So I just kept Googling, and I just thought I was missing it. And as it slowly dawned on me that this didn't exist yet, I thought, oh, well, what a fun opportunity for me to combine my two passions, art and computer science, and to build a platform where you can put all the world's art. And at the time, I thought it was going to be like a 3-month project, just to build a website and then get all the galleries and museums to put their art on it.
And what was that time? What year?
That was 4 years ago.
Okay.
So we launched 2 months ago in October. So took a lot longer than I expected, but that's how it started.
So as the creator, rather than the designer of the software, what was the inspiration? You obviously wanted to deliver some amazing experience to these free users that you were serving.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very lucky in that I got to grow up in cities in London and in New York, to have a father who is an art writer, an art critic, dragging me, kicking and screaming to galleries and museums and really taking the time to explain the art to me. And because of that, I just had this deep love for art from a young age. But for the vast majority of people, it's hard to imagine at Miami right now, but once you step outside of a major city, the amount of access to art and the number of people who, if you ask them, who's your favorite artist, or what's the last show you went to, what's your favorite work, have nothing to say, or it's even worse than that. They almost feel like they're an outsider, like, oh, I'm not cool enough to know about art. And there's this real kind of negative, almost like intimidation, these negative emotions associated with the art world. And it was just realizing that that's actually the norm for the vast majority of people. And just wanting everyone to have the same amount of access that I did. We think a lot about music as an inspiration. 100 years ago, music was the way the art world was today. It was really a very small percentage of people actually had access to music, could talk about going to concerts, could talk intelligently about musicians. And it was very much sort of a sign that you were an insider, that you had this sort of special access that other people didn't. Now that music is something that everyone has access to because of the internet, because of the record player, because of the radio, it's not such a big deal. You can go to anyone on the street, anywhere in the world, and say, who's your favorite musician? What's the last concert you went to? People have a passionate answer. So we just want art to become just as ubiquitous a part of our culture as music is today.
So they're going to say Mark Rothko or Francis Bacon with a lot of passion. And as
Absolutely.
you said, you're rescuing people from some of the negative emotions they might have around art because they might feel a little deprived. Have you heard back from any of these people that you've reached in the hinterlands to give us an idea of what effect you're having?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, people really vote with their time. The average user spends over 12 minutes on the site per session. So even for someone who hits the site and hits the back button, that means there's someone else who spent at least 24 minutes. So people get really engaged, they get really sucked in, even people who've never had experience with art before. My experience coming to Design Miami, we worked with Design Miami to represent them online, and I hope some of you had a chance to check it out. But for me, coming to the fair, after having been able to research and see things online and have certain pieces that I had read about, I just felt so much more confident going into a gallery, asking them questions about specific pieces and about the artist, because I've taken the time to research the works, and that just makes for a far more kind of natural, comfortable conversation. So even for someone like me who's taken a lot of art history, spent a lot of time in the art world, I still get that intimidation when I walk in somewhere where I'm not familiar with the work. Being able to experience it online beforehand and do my research makes me more excited and more comfortable. So there's both that kind of anecdotal evidence as well as just the numbers kind of speak for themselves on our site.
And this week, the experience of having Design Miami posted on the site, what kind of feedback are you getting from people who are floating around but also possibly contacting you from outside of Miami?
So far, anecdotally, it's been really, really good. A lot of people had a similar reaction where they'll go into a booth ready to talk about something that they're already interested in. We've gotten really great feedback from the galleries. So this is how you can access Design Miami on ART.SY. And we also have the ability for people to write about work. So we've had interesting curators and collectors talking about what are their favorite works at the fair and starting to produce that content on ART.SY. So it's another way for people to engage with the art. So here are more examples of people writing about the art at the fair.
And could you tell us a little bit more about the Art Genome project and the design of all this synthesis behind it?
Absolutely. So the Art Genome project was inspired by Pandora. So for every artwork and artist on ART.SY, we have a team of art historians who researches the artist and assigns different genes to it. So for example, you could say, this has a 70 for abstract expressionism, this has a 50 for conceptual art, this has a 30 for topographic photography. And we don't expose the numbers publicly because the numbers are meaningless to humans. But what the numbers do is they allow us to determine which works are most likely to be related to each other. So if we go back to here, you see this Robert Frank, and below it's picking out other artworks and artists that you might be interested in if you're interested in Robert Frank. And the genes that it's usually using to connect them are examples include photojournalism, Americana, scenes of everyday life, black and white photography, documentary photography. So you get a sense for kind of how we're adding this layer of metadata and how it's being used to make connections between artworks and artists. And it's not supposed to be dogmatic so much as just a way for people to, here, if you're interested in this, here are more things to click on. And that's the reason why people spend so much time on the site, is there's always more avenues for discovery and exploration.
And you say not dogmatic, but there is a degree of subjectivity to how you connect things. Is that coming from a team? Is that you figuring out the different genes and how they're interacting?
Yeah, so one of the things we have to do, which is actually a design exercise in itself, is go through all of art history and say, what are sort of the principal components, or what are the axioms of art history? So there are the obvious canonized movements, such as abstract expressionism, pop art, impressionism, etc. But it gets a lot trickier when you get into contemporary art, sort of 1960 to the modern day. It's been one of the most innovative and dynamic periods of art history. So it's a really interesting challenge to go into those 50 years and say, how can we tease out patterns? How can we tease out themes? How can we tease out influences that connect contemporary artists and also connect them back into, the cool thing is you might start with a contemporary artist like John Curran, but then end up, being connected to classical artists, old masters, if they have certain sort of visual similarities or certain subject matters. But it's really hard to do, and we're actually, we'll notice two genes are very similar, and a lot of works are getting the same scores in two genes, and we'll see these, we'll draw up these correlation charts. And if two genes have really high correlation, we might say, maybe this is really just one gene, and we'll combine them together. Or we'll outgrow genes. We used to have math and science as a gene, and now we have math as a gene and science as a gene because it got too big. Now I'm arguing we should have chemistry, biology, physics, and computer science, and not just science. But this is sort of an example of a constant evolution that goes on in the genome.
And what happens with the math and science gene? Is this talk about some artists that come up for that?
Oh God, I'm totally blanking. Actually, one of my favorite artists, of course, has the math and science gene. But I guess an example is if we have a lot of artists all being described by this math and science gene, you start to feel like you're painting two broad strokes. And so eventually you have to say, well, is it really about math or is it really about science? And those things aren't the same. And it's really interesting. You really see the fact that art historians are kind of driving the boat here, because as someone who has a computer science degree, I think, how can you ever like put all of math and science into like one bucket, just one gene for like this, this fundamental like aspect of like human culture and like civilization and progress. So there's this kind of like constant like give and take within the team. Another interesting one was furry and shaggy. It was actually a huge challenge for us, because what we realized was it's very different. The experience of the user is very different whether they are, is the artwork itself furry or shaggy? Like, is it actually, if you touch it and pet it, is it kind of like petting an animal? Or is it, how is that similar to a photograph of hair, where there is no like physical sensation of the furriness, but there's a depiction of the furriness, or there's a concept of the furriness. So these are like other interesting kind of examples. And actually, we write about this, so if you guys are interested in learning more about these kinds of discussions, you can go to theartgenomeproject.tumblr.com, and there's all sorts of just like hilarious and like really fascinating examples of this stuff. A lot to nerd out on.
You don't have that on a slide, but we'll repeat it at the end again so everybody can get it. I'm very interested in this idea of you and your group sitting down and figuring all this out. Is it late night sessions with pizza boxes and lots of coffee, or do you do it as a part of your daily ritual to actually come back to that?
I would say it starts on the latter, and then it inevitably moves into the former. You try and have a good daily routine, but with a lot of these things, things take so long, because when I liked what you said at the beginning, this notion of bringing together intuition and technology to kind of create these transcendent design experiences. I'll give you an example of a feature that kept us up very late. So the idea behind this is that, again, ideally you live in the city where you can see this work in person in a museum. For many people, they don't have that kind of opportunity. So in ART.SY, you can find the artwork, you can read about it, but how do you actually have a sense for its size, for its physicality, for its presence in a space? And of course, you can never come close to recreating that online. But we thought we would do our best to give people some taste of what that might be like. Getting this feature to work really kind of gets at the core of this idea of bringing together design and engineering. So this is not an installation photo. This room you're looking at is completely algorithmically generated. So the room is scaled, and the bench is scaled to match the real world size of the painting. The painting is actually hung at the right height on the wall to be at your eye level. And the photographer, your viewing point is actually moved the appropriate distance back from the wall to make sure that you have that optimal viewing experience. So getting all those different calculations, and the other thing that's worth mentioning is, if you look actually, and you should check it out on the site, you just click view in room. If you look at the floor, because we wanted it to feel very realistic, we didn't use a pattern to generate the floor. So every panel on that wooden floor has a unique wood grain. And so kind of trying to solve all these problems, this was just sort of back and forth between our designer and our head of engineering for weeks to get those like little details right. And that's often the kind of thing that keeps us up late at night. But for me, I think this feature really gets at kind of our core values, which is really about bringing together art and science, or design and technology.
Well, and you just described the quintessence of the design process, where you're solving these problems, but what you are seeking to deliver is a sensory and an emotional experience.
Exactly. You want the user to come just to forget where they are. When people click that button, I've seen it. It never gets old. There's always this sort of like, when it happens, when the painting just goes, it moves down, it shrinks to the size, and then the room appears, and they just forget that they're on a website. It just feels like it's not being there in person. Can't kid ourselves. It's not as good as being there in person, but it is an experience, and it gets people every time. To make those kinds of transcendent experiences, we believe very strongly that it comes when you have that seamless integration of technology and design.
And Carter, do you have a sense of anyone that you've reached in Mongolia, or like how far out has this gone?
Yeah, so since our launch, we've served over 60 million artwork impressions to people in over 180 countries. And actually, we give our gallery partners an analytics dashboard where they can see where their traffic is coming from. And they're always really delighted. You know, a New York gallery who mostly sees clients from New York City, and they see the map lighting up in St. Petersburg, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Australia, in South America and South Africa. And so and I would actually say what's interesting is users or people from those foreign cities actually find a lot more value in ART.SY than people who live in New York, where you can take the subway and see a lot of the world's greatest art at a lot of the best museums and galleries. So particularly for people in those foreign cities, ART.SY is delivering value that they really couldn't get in person. And another interesting statistic there is the majority of sales, if you're a gallery, occur within your own city. On ART.SY, the average distance between a buyer and a seller when a sale happens is over 2,600 miles. So these are like intercontinental connections that are being made. And then it's really great to see relationships start to form. Like, then a lot of these collectors might actually, after purchasing from the gallery from abroad, they might come to an art fair like Miami and actually meet them in person. And so it's laying the seeds of these new relationships.
Wonderful, Carter. We have more designers to go, so there won't be time for questions individually, but Carter will be around afterwards, so if you want to grab him. And again, could you repeat the Art Genome address?
The Art Genome Project.tumblr.com, and the main site can be accessed at ART.SY, ART.SY. It's just 5 characters. There's no .com.
Thank you, Carter.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Just a couple of concluding remarks. We are launching really a year-long series of events that Be Open is sponsoring, and this journey through the senses that they describe is really going to be once again very active at Milan Design Week in April. Specifically around a temporary installation built inside an historical courtyard at the University Statale, where different designers will be presented to express their views on sensory design. And in addition to the installation, there will be other events at the Design Week, interactive events, once again planned to explore also the technological side of the senses that we've talked about today in great detail, and to involve visitors there in multisensorial personal experience. And also there will be talks in Milan, sponsored by Be Open, but also the next one in Mumbai, where there is going to be a design week in March, then Milan in April, then in London, and then in Tokyo. So please stay tuned and follow this incredible voyage. And once again, thank you to everyone here, to the designers, to Alexandra Cunningham for convening these fascinating creatures. And thank you very much for showing up. Thanks. Bye-bye.